October 14th, 2001, would forever haunt the small town of Cedar Creek, Texas. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple, when 12-year-old Lily Carter failed to return home from her piano lesson. At first, her parents thought she had stayed behind to practice, or perhaps lingered at a friend's house nearby. But when the hour passed, and Lily's quiet neighborhood remained empty of her footsteps, a gnawing fear settled in. Her mother, Susan Carter, called the police, and by 9 p.m. officers were combing streets, checking every familiar route, every neighbor's backyard, every empty lot. By midnight, it became clear that this was no ordinary missing child case. Lily was gone, vanished without a trace. From the very beginning, the investigation was meticulous. Officers canvassed Cedar Creek, going door to door, collecting witness statements, and checking nearby convenience stores and parks. They set up roadblocks, interviewed bus drivers, and reviewed security tapes from every local business that had cameras, a rare but invaluable tool in 2001. Detective Mark Reynolds, who led the initial investigation, recalled later, "Even in a small town like ours, we mobilized every available resource. We knew the clock was ticking, and every minute counted when a child was missing." Susan and her husband, Richard, refused to surrender to despair. They spent nights distributing flyers, talking to neighbors, and making desperate calls to local media outlets. The community rallied around them, organizing search parties in fields, wooded areas, and the creek beds that cut through the outskirts of town. Despite the efforts, days turned into weeks with no new leads. For Susan, the uncertainty was unbearable. "I would wake in the middle of the night, expecting to hear her footsteps, expecting to see her little hand reaching for mine," she remembered years later. "Every sound in the house made my heart race." As weeks passed, the investigation faced its first major hurdle, a complete absence of physical evidence. Lily's backpack and shoes were found near the music school, but there were no fingerprints, no signs of forced entry, no witness accounts of suspicious activity. The case began to grow cold by early December. Detective Reynolds admitted that the small-town environment, which normally offered comfort, now created blind spots. The streets were familiar, the neighbors friendly, and the absence of strangers made it harder to pinpoint a suspect. Meanwhile, life for the Carter family was a blur of appointments, interviews, and sleepless nights. Susan spent hours speaking with counselors, community leaders, and volunteers, keeping herself composed for Richard and their 2 younger children. Richard, normally stoic, allowed his frustration to surface in rare moments. He spent hours studying maps of Cedar Creek, tracing every route Lily could have taken, retracing paths with volunteers in the dead of night, and coordinating with neighboring counties to expand the search perimeter. The town itself seemed to pause, collectively holding its breath in hope and fear. By 2002, the official investigation had slowed, constrained by limited leads and resources. Still, the Carters refused to give up. They hired a private investigator, Thomas Green, who brought a fresh perspective to the case. Green meticulously reviewed the original files, interviews, and police notes, seeking patterns that might have been missed. He noted small inconsistencies, unusual behavior by neighbors, and subtle details in witness statements. He spent months recreating timelines, interviewing friends, teachers, and local residents who had been children themselves at the time. Each conversation added pieces to a puzzle that had remained incomplete for nearly a year. Community interest remained high. Local media covered anniversary milestones, keeping Lily's story alive. Candlelight vigils, fundraisers, and volunteer-led search events continued into the winter of 2002. Residents displayed photos in store windows, churches hosted prayer events, and children in the community left drawings and letters in the front yard of the Carter home. While painful, the attention reminded the family that they were not alone. That hope had not entirely faded. The turning point in the investigation came unexpectedly in 2005, 4 years after Lily's disappearance. A technician at the Texas Department of Public Safety, reviewing old cases as part of a pilot cold case initiative, noted that a DNA sample collected from Lily's backpack in 2001 had never been fully analyzed with the new technology emerging in the early 2000s. The sample, though degraded, was sufficient for modern testing. When matched against the state DNA database, the results were astonishing. A clear link to a local man, Gregory Harris, who had lived in Cedar Creek at the time and remained in the area. Harris had been known in the community, a quiet neighbor who maintained a low profile. He had volunteered at schools, attended church functions, and was considered by most as trustworthy. But the DNA evidence, combined with a careful review of his movements in October 2001, painted a chilling picture. Investigators discovered that Harris had been present near the music school on the day Lily disappeared, his activities previously unaccounted for, and no one had considered him a suspect at the time. In 2006, authorities moved swiftly to arrest Harris. The warrant was executed early one morning. Neighbors watched in disbelief as officers led him away. Many recalled moments where he had appeared friendly, helpful, and unremarkable, a man hiding a terrifying secret beneath a facade of normalcy. The arrest sent shockwaves through Cedar Creek. For decades, the community had searched for answers, suspected strangers, and questioned anyone acting out of the ordinary. The revelation that someone so familiar could commit such a crime was nearly impossible to process. For the Carter family, the arrest brought a complex mix of relief, anger, and sorrow. After 5 years of living in uncertainty, knowing that the person responsible had been identified allowed them to begin healing. Susan described the moment she learned of Harris's capture. It was surreal. I had imagined this moment for years, and yet, when it finally happened, I couldn't quite believe it. A part of me wanted to scream, cry, and hug him at the same time. It was justice at last, though it came too late to undo the pain. Harris's trial began in late 2006, and the courtroom was filled with townspeople, law enforcement officers, and reporters. The prosecution presented a meticulous case, combining the DNA match with testimony from those who had observed Harris's suspicious behavior in 2001. Forensic experts explained how advances in DNA technology allowed investigators to link Harris definitively to Lily, a connection that would have been impossible to make in 2001. The defense, faced with overwhelming evidence, focused on challenging the reliability of long-term witness memories and Harris's claims of innocence. Despite this, the jury reached a unanimous verdict in just 2 days, guilty of kidnapping and murder. Lily's parents, while still mourning the life stolen from their daughter, finally experienced the sense of resolution that had eluded them for years. Harris was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The family worked with counselors and local support groups to process the complex emotions that followed. The relief of justice mixed with grief for the years of loss and the knowledge that their child's life had been taken too. Soon, the Texas Department of Public Safety, inspired by the resolution of the Carter case, expanded its cold case unit, emphasizing the importance of preserving evidence, continually updating databases, and applying modern science to historical investigations. Cedar Creek, while forever marked by tragedy, became a model for other small towns, demonstrating the power of persistence, community support, and technological advancement in solving cases once thought lost to time. Susan and Richard continued to honor Lily's memory by advocating for children's safety programs in schools, sponsoring scholarships for young musicians, and sharing their story to raise awareness about the importance of vigilance, reporting, and forensic innovation. They frequently met with law enforcement officers to discuss lessons learned, hoping their experience would prevent future tragedies. Even after the trial, Cedar Creek residents often spoke of Lily's name with reverence, remembering her as a vibrant, curious, and kind child whose absence had reshaped the community. The town's memorial garden, planted with lilies each spring, became a living tribute, not just to Lily, but to all children whose lives had been interrupted by violence. Families who had once felt helpless drew inspiration from the Carters' resilience and advocacy, understanding that justice might be delayed, but it was never impossible. After the courtroom verdict in late 2006, Cedar Creek tried to return to normal. But for the Carter family, normal had been forever changed. Every corner of their home, every memory, carried the echo of Lily's laughter, the sound of her piano lessons, the quiet questions she used to ask about the world. Susan often found herself staring at the empty spot at the dining table where Lily's chair had been, a painful reminder that even justice could not bring her back. Richard threw himself into community work, volunteering with local law enforcement to help improve child safety protocols and ensure that no family would endure. The Carters also faced the complicated emotions that followed Harris's conviction. Relief at finally knowing the truth was intertwined with lingering anger and grief. Susan admitted in later interviews, "It felt like a weight had been lifted, but my heart still aches every single day. Knowing who did it doesn't undo the fact that my daughter is gone." Despite these emotions, the family committed themselves to turning their tragedy into action. They began speaking at local schools, sharing their story with children, parents, and educators, emphasizing the importance of awareness, vigilance, and reporting anything suspicious. Meanwhile, law enforcement in Texas recognized the wider implications of the Carter case. Detective Mark Reynolds and his colleagues advocated for permanent cold case units, funding for forensic testing, and better evidence preservation. In 2007, the Texas Department of Public Safety officially expanded its cold case program, inspired by the resolution of the Carter investigation. Officers from other counties began visiting Cedar Creek to observe methods, review the case files, and learn how modern technology could solve cases that had gone cold for years. The Carters often joined these sessions, providing testimony about the emotional toll of living with uncertainty for over 5 years. In the broader Cedar Creek community, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, though the scars remained. Neighbors who had once suspected strangers or questioned each other now understood that evil could hide in plain sight. Many families attended the annual memorial for Lily, lighting candles and sharing stories about her. Some residents reported a sense of closure, while others described ongoing anxiety, a lingering fear that the safety they had assumed for their town could be fragile. The memorial garden grew each year, filled with vibrant lilies, roses, and tulips planted by children who never knew Lily, but felt her absence as a reminder of the importance of protecting one another. By 2008, a pattern began to emerge in Texas and other states. Advancements in forensic science were reopening long cold cases. The Carter case had demonstrated the effectiveness of revisiting old evidence with modern DNA analysis. Law enforcement agencies began reviewing files from the early 2000s and even the 1990s, seeking unresolved cases where technology could make a difference. Detective Reynolds often spoke about how the technology available in 2001 had been limited. "We did everything we could with what we had," he said in a 2009 interview. "But sometimes the tools just weren't there. It's a blessing that now we can bring closure to families who have waited decades." For the Carters, these developments offered a sense of purpose. They began working with non-profit organizations dedicated to supporting victims' families and improving cold case investigations. Susan, in particular, found solace in advocating for policies that would mandate DNA preservation, proper evidence storage, and systematic review of unsolved cases. Richard joined community advisory boards, helping to bridge the gap between law enforcement and families seeking answers. Their combined efforts inspired other families, many of whom had resigned themselves to never knowing what happened to their loved ones. Despite the progress, the emotional journey was ongoing. Anniversaries of Lily's disappearance were particularly difficult. October mornings reminded Susan of the day she last saw her daughter, the hope she had clung to, and the despair that followed. She would visit Lily's memorial garden, placing a single lily in bloom at the center, speaking quietly to her child as if she could hear her. Richard often joined, holding her hand, sharing stories from their past, and promising that Lily's memory would never fade. The case also revealed how small-town dynamics could both hinder and help investigations. Cedar Creek's tight-knit community initially provided both cover and support for Harris. His ability to blend in, to appear ordinary and trustworthy, allowed him to evade suspicion for years. But the same community, once aware, became a powerful force for justice and healing. Volunteer groups, school programs, and neighborhood watch initiatives emerged, creating a vigilant, supportive environment that would deter future crimes and help families in crisis. By 2010, the Carters had begun to share their story on regional media outlets, emphasizing the lessons learned from their ordeal. They stressed the importance of perseverance, the value of modern forensic science, and the power of community support. Interviews with Susan and Richard appeared on television and in local newspapers, often accompanied by photos of Lily's smiling face, her piano, and the garden where children continued to plant lilies in her memory. These appearances not only honored Lily, but also encouraged other families to keep advocating for justice, no matter how much time had passed. The Texas Cold Case Initiative continued to yield results. Investigators inspired by the Carter case began reopening similar cases across the state, applying DNA analysis, fingerprint re-examination, and digital database comparisons. Each breakthrough reinforced the Carters' belief that persistence mattered, that even decades-old mysteries could be solved with the right combination of science, dedication, and community involvement. Despite the progress, Susan and Richard never stopped grieving. Every moment of advocacy and every success in other cases was bittersweet, a reminder of what had been lost. They often spoke about Lily to their younger children, ensuring that her story and legacy remained alive in the family, shaping how they viewed compassion, resilience, and justice. The Carter family's journey was a testament to the power of hope, patience, and modern technology. By 2012, they were considered leaders in victim advocacy, traveling across Texas to share insights with law enforcement, families, and schools. Their work emphasized that justice delayed did not mean justice denied. Even after more than a decade, Lily's story inspired systemic change, prompting law enforcement to examine policies, update investigative methods, and remain committed to solving cases that others might have considered impossible. As Cedar Creek settled into the next decade, the memory of 2001 remained vivid. Residents often recalled the anxiety, the long nights searching, and the communal effort that ultimately helped bring Harris to justice. While the town could not erase the tragedy, it became a stronger, more vigilant community, aware that the safety of children required constant attention, collaboration, and innovation. Susan and Richard continued to honor Lily through music scholarships, community programs, and by participating in cold case review panels. They dedicated themselves to helping other families navigate the complex emotional and legal challenges of long unsolved cases. Their story became a blueprint for resilience, demonstrating that even in the face of unimaginable loss, families could transform grief into meaningful action. By 2015, the Carter case was often cited in law enforcement training programs as an example of how DNA evidence, coupled with persistence and community engagement, could resolve even the most challenging cold cases. The local sheriff's department included it in educational sessions, highlighting the importance of revisiting old evidence, documenting every detail, and leveraging technological advancements to achieve justice. Even with all the progress, the Carters' lives were permanently shaped by Lily's absence. Every piano recital, every neighborhood gathering, and every school event reminded them of the daughter they had lost. Yet through their advocacy, Cedar Creek had become safer, more aware, and more supportive of families in crisis. Their efforts ensured that Lily's memory lived on, influencing law enforcement, inspiring the community, and serving as a lasting reminder that justice, no matter how delayed, could still be achieved. By 2016, the Carter family had settled into a rhythm of remembrance and advocacy. Susan and Richard often visited Lily's memorial garden, now fully grown with tulips, lilies, and roses planted by families across Cedar Creek. The annual candlelight vigil had become a staple in the town, drawing hundreds of attendees from neighboring communities. Students from the local high school participated, reading poems, playing music, and sharing stories about how Lily's memory inspired them to take action against bullying, neglect, and unsafe environments for children. Meanwhile, law enforcement continued to refine investigative practices, taking lessons from the Carter case and applying them statewide. Cold case units in Texas began adopting a collaborative approach, combining local police knowledge with state resources and university forensic expertise. Detective Mark Reynolds, who had led the original investigation, often remarked that this was the only way to ensure that cases didn't remain unsolved for decades. "We learned that a combination of perseverance, community input, and modern science is the key," he said during a 2017 training seminar. Despite the case's resolution, the emotional toll on the Carters remained profound. Anniversaries of Lily's disappearance and of Harris's conviction were particularly difficult. Susan described how even small triggers, like hearing a piano tune in a store or seeing a child wearing the same shade of green as Lily's favorite dress, could bring back waves of grief. Yet she and Richard found strength in their ongoing advocacy. They spoke openly about their experience, understanding that sharing their pain could help others navigate. The case also prompted Cedar Creek schools to implement new safety protocols. Staff received training in identifying warning signs of abuse or predatory behavior, and parent workshops were offered on how to monitor children's online and physical environments. The Carters were frequently invited to speak at these events, sharing personal insights into how small actions and awareness could prevent disasters. These initiatives became a model for other small towns in Texas, illustrating how a single family's tragedy could influence broader social change. By 2018, the Carter case had inspired nationwide interest. Law enforcement agencies in neighboring states studied the investigative files to understand how modern DNA analysis, fingerprint re-examination, and database cross-referencing led to Harris's arrest. Academic papers were published, detailing the challenges of preserving evidence from the early 2000s and the importance of revisiting cold cases with fresh perspectives. University criminal justice programs began using the Carter case as a textbook example, highlighting both the limitations of early 21st century investigative tools and the breakthroughs possible through scientific advancement. The Carters themselves expanded their advocacy beyond Cedar Creek. Susan joined a nonprofit dedicated to families of missing children, offering counseling, legal advice, and emotional support. Richard focused on working with law enforcement to establish better evidence preservation protocols, ensuring that physical samples, digital records, and witness statements were properly documented and stored for future analysis. Together, they hosted workshops and spoke at conferences, sharing lessons learned from their long and painful journey. Despite these accomplishments, healing was gradual. Richard sometimes struggled with anger, particularly toward the local authorities who had initially dismissed key leads during the 2001 investigation. He attended therapy sessions to manage this ongoing tension, understanding that unresolved anger could prevent him from fully moving forward. Susan, meanwhile, focused on maintaining Lily's memory in ways that were constructive. She created an annual scholarship in Lily's name for young musicians, hoping that her daughter's love of piano could inspire others even after her absence. By 2020, Cedar Creek had changed dramatically. New families moved into the town, drawn by improved schools and a strong community spirit, fostered in part by the Carters' activism. Local law enforcement reported a higher rate of solved missing persons cases, attributed to better training, community engagement, and increased technological resources. The town had learned a difficult lesson about the dangers that can hide in plain sight, but also about the power of resilience, collaboration, and dedication. The COVID-19 pandemic brought new challenges. Memorial gatherings were limited, and Susan and Richard had to adapt, hosting virtual candlelight vigils and online advocacy events. While these measures felt impersonal, they allowed families across Texas to participate safely. During this period, the Carters also worked with state officials to ensure that evidence in unsolved cases remained accessible for remote forensic review. This approach led to several additional cold cases being reopened and solved, further cementing Cedar Creek's role as a model for persistent, technology-driven investigations. In 2021, a documentary team approached the Carters, proposing a film about Lily's story and the broader implications of cold case investigations. Susan and Richard agreed, seeing an opportunity to reach a wider audience and to emphasize the importance of hope, perseverance, and science in solving long-standing mysteries. Interviews included detailed recollections of the initial disappearance, the community search efforts, the heartbreak of delayed justice, and the eventual arrest and conviction of Harris. The documentary highlighted the emotional, social, and scientific dimensions of the case, inspiring viewers nationwide. By 2022, the Carters had also begun participating in legislative advocacy. They met with Texas state lawmakers to discuss policies ensuring mandatory DNA preservation, the establishment of permanent cold case units, and improved communication between local and state law enforcement agencies. Their efforts contributed to legislative changes aimed at preventing other families from enduring decades-long uncertainty. Throughout this time, the memory of Lily remained central to their lives. Even as they worked tirelessly on advocacy, Susan and Richard preserved moments of personal reflection. They maintained a small room in their home dedicated to Lily's memory, with photographs, her favorite piano music, and mementos of her childhood. This private space allowed them to grieve openly, separate from their public work and advocacy efforts. By 2023, the Carter case had become part of Cedar Creek's history and identity. Annual school programs incorporated lessons about child safety, resilience, and the importance of community involvement. Residents often reference the case when discussing the need to remain vigilant and proactive. The town's reputation shifted from a place marked by tragedy to one recognized for its commitment to justice, safety, and education. Despite the passage of over 2 decades, the Carters never ceased their efforts. In interviews, Susan emphasized that the fight for justice does not end with a single conviction. Justice for one family can inspire change for many, she said in a 2024 talk at a law enforcement conference. Lily's story is proof that persistence matters, that science matters, and that we must never give up, no matter how long it takes. The Carter family's journey demonstrated the profound impact that a single resolved cold case can have on a community, a state, and even a nation. By 2025, more than 20 other cold cases in Texas had been solved,